All right, Islam, and welcome to Moor's Heritage and History School. This is your host, Anahita L., and this is a sort of kind of listening event. We're going to pick up where we left off last week from our reading out of the forgotten history of Britain's white slaves in America. Now we're going to be picking up on chapter 4. Let's see. We're going to try and do 2 chapters. And what's going to happen is, depending on how lengthy the chapters are, I think I might be able to get in 2 chapters, and then what we will do afterwards is 9 o'clock, I'm going to stop reading, and then what we will do is we will discuss the information that has been presented in this reading. So, please take out your pens and your papers, and if you hear anything that, sounds, might have connected a dot in your mind with things, because, see, all of this is going on in early 1600s, all right? So some of the things that you're going to hear, as I have heard, they have connected significant dots with some of, what's going on today on this Moroccan American continent. In addition, it affirms that a lot of the procedures, because it's not law, a lot of the procedures that are being carried out is actually what they're calling English law. Now, this is America or Morocco, and therefore English law has no place on this landmass, especially when you take into consideration that the American Constitution secured and affirms that supreme law on this land is the American Constitution. So we have a lot of catching up to do. And I say that because this information that we are now reading, it ought to have been presented in these institutions that they call school. But as you follow along, you will realize why they would never, ever present this information in these institutions, because many of the people who are presenting this information, they are in fact the lineal descendants of the people we are discussing today. So in order for them to continue to mentally indoctrinate the Aboriginal indigenous people into believing that they are the slaves, they cannot unveil this information. So at the time of awakening for everyone, this is the age of information, and look what information is being unfolded. So I'm going to get into the reading because although I read this, it's interesting to have it refreshed. And, when you read it more than once, which I trust everyone is doing, you see things with new eyes, even though you may have read the entire book. So, once again, I got your pen and your paper, and jot down any flags, something you didn't know, might be a dot that connects with some information or some thought of today. But by all means, Please, this is an opportunity for everyone to speak and practice speaking. So take advantage of this opportunity. So we're going to pick up on Chapter 4. Chapter 4 is entitled The Children of the City. To London in the early 1600s, looking south from St. Paul's Cathedral would have seen a Renaissance palace on the near bank of the River Thames. It stood where Blackfriars Bridge is today, deep red in color, bordered on the west by the rambling courts of the Temple and on the east by the Fleet Ditch, pushing the filth of London into the Thames. The onlooker would have noticed the three vast courtyards, the sweep of long galleries enclosing them, the terrace facing over the river, and the guards on the huge, heavy gate. This was Bridewell, earlier by the young Henry VIII, to house visiting rulers and ambassadors, and sometimes the king himself. It was here at Bridewell that the papal envoy stayed during the futile negotiations over Henry's divorce from Catherine of Aragon, and here that Catherine learned that she was being replaced as queen by Anne Boleyn. It was here that the greatest foreign monarch ever entertained in England, the Holy Roman Emperor Charles V, was invited to lodge. But by 1618, it was utterly changed. The boy king Edward VI had donated London as a hospital, and it subsequently transmogrified into an infamous house of correction. Strumpet, night walkers, pickpockets, vagrants, and idle persons were brought here for exemplary punishment and whipping, and then a year or two in the prison workshop for picking oakum or beating hemp. Innocent and guilty, hundreds at a time were packed in to undergo the Jacobean. Bridewell was the chosen holding pen when Thomas Smith, his assistant Sir Edwin Sandys, and the Lord Mayor of London agreed a plan to sweep London clear of street children and ship them to the colonies in the New World. It would later hold many others also destined for the colonies. The roundup began on 8 August when constables seized 3 boys and a girl and lodged them in Bridewell. They were told that they had been judged favorites and by court order were being held for Virginia. Over the next 6 months, another 108 boys and 28 girls aged between 8 and 16 years old were brought in to join them. The following February, they were lined up in Bridewell so that representatives from the Virginia Company could take their pick and the shipment began. The first 100 children arrived in America around Easter time, 1619, 4 months before the arrival of a shipment of black slaves that had attracted more attention than any other, and which will be examined at the end of this chapter. Another 100 followed, then another shipment, and another. Children would die before they reached adulthood. Idea of transporting vagrant children had been floated in the early days of Virginia when the company first came under pressure to provide a faraway dump for the unwanted. Hugh Bleak, the English consul in Lisbon, marked it in 1609 in a letter to Thomas Wilson, secretary to the king's chief minister, Robert Cecil. Lee's reports usually concerned the suspected plotting of English Catholic rescue. Child labor was a novelty. Lee had been watching a fleet of car rats maneuver into the Tacus at one morning when he realized that they were packed with children. He started asking questions and discovered that boys and girls as young as 10 were being transported to the East Indies to work on plantations. The theory was that young bodies would acclimatize better than adult bodies to the searing heat of the tropics. Considerable numbers being shipped out, 1,500 on board the 5 carriers that had attracted these attention. In his report to London, the consul suggested that England take a leaf from the Portuguese book and try child labor in its own colony. Hold on. I just lost my place. In the event, the Portuguese stopped shipping children to the east because their outposts there fell to the all-conquering fleet of Dutch. However, the idea was not forgotten in England. After 1615, when the door was opened for convict transportation, English eyes turned to street children and the possibility of getting rid of them, especially from overcrowded, plague-ridden, crime-ridden, bombing London. Street children were not, of course, unique to London in 16th and 17th centuries. Venetians bewailed the enormous increase in the number of children, rogues, and beggars who wandered around the squares of San Marco and the Coronation. Frenchmen complained in Lyons about the noise of the great number of children crying and hooting with hunger day and night through the town. They were making a marvelous racket in the churches. Londoners would have heard the same sound and seen similar scenes and on a larger scale. The city was teeming with homeless urchins and teenage runaways. A petition asking for action over them referred to the great number of vagrant boys and girls who lie in the street, having no place of abode nor friends to relieve them. There is no knowing exactly how many street children there were, but in a city of 200,000, they must have totaled many. Most of them would have survived hand to mouth through petty theft, begging and selling their bodies. One imagines them ragged, half-starved, and impotent, lineal ancestors of the Cockney urchins Dickens depicted 2 centuries later. In 1617, conciliars from 100 parishes were called to a meeting in St. Paul to discuss street urchins or street children. There might have been a sense of urgency because the Privy Council berated metropolitan officials over the infinite multitude of rogues and vagrants at large in the liberty. The council had warned that the king was thinking of appointing a man of his own, a provost marshal, to deal with the problem. The St. Paul's meeting agreed to assess each parish with the aim of ridding the city of as many children as possible. Eyes turned to Virginia as a solution. Under the poor law, a parish could get shot of some of children by forcibly apprenticing them in another parish a few miles away. Though it is thought only small numbers were ever involved, what was now proposed was very different. A mass street roundup ending on the other side of the world. The Virginia Company appears to have been happy to cooperate. The company wanted children both to work in the tobacco fields and as part of a developing strategy to promote family life in the colony. Company documents show that there were plans to import hundreds of women and offer an apprentice as a bonus to who married one of them. Talks between the City of London aldermen and the Virginia Company began early in 1618. Sir Thomas Smith and Sir Edwin Sandys, the Puritan politicians, represented the company. Sandys, one of the leading figures in the House of Commons, was a major investor in the Virginia Company. and had involved himself in its affair as far back as 1609. He generally played a background role, but after 1615, when Sir Thomas Smith's health began to deteriorate, Sir Edwin became much more prominent in company affairs, deputizing Thomas when the great merchant was absent. After weeks of haggling with the Lord Mayor, agreement was reached on the street children. The city would pay the company £5 a head to take them off its hands and ship 100 out to America as apprentices. It was agreed that all children would have to be between 8 and 16 years of age and have been born in London. As with the decree authorizing convict transportation, the agreement was dressed up in bright humanitarian clothes. The Virginia Company was depicted as savior of starving children who would learn a trade in the colony, just as apprentices did in England, and one day they would be granted some land. The prolific letter writer John Chamberlain summed up the view of London gentry when he wrote that shipping to Virginia 100 young boys and girls that had been starving in the streets is one of the best deeds that could be done. However, it would turn out that few, if any, of these Cockney apprentices would learn the mystery of smithing or baking or tailoring or physicking, finding how to dispose of children. One document stated that the children would be apprenticed in such trades and professions as the company shall see fit. Another required the children merely to be employed in some industrious courses. In fact, most were destined for the tobacco plantations, where the only trade they learned was as field laborers. In the summer of 1618, the roundups began. The Lord Mayor ordered constables to walk the streets, and forthwith and girls, as they shall find in the streets and in the markets or wandering in the night, and commit them to Bridewell, there to remain until further order be given. The constables appear to have gone about it surreptitiously and with good reason, for a heavy hand in London's warrant of the back alleys could quickly incite a riot. Macaulay describing the White Friars' liberty between St. Paul's and the River Road, quote, "No peace officer's life was in safety. Bullies with swords and cudgels and termagant hags with spits and broomsticks poured forth by hundreds, and the intruder was fortunate if he escaped back into Fleet Street, hustled, stripped, and pumped up. Even the warrant of the Chief Justice of England could not be executed without the help of a company of musketeers." End quote. To avoid trouble, constables picked up children from the main thoroughfares and marched one or two at a time. The first two, Romley, were arrested by the Beadle patrolling Britain Street, a road on the edge of Smithfield clogged with market stalls. Same day, a girl and boy, Jane Wenchman and Andrew Nutting, were picked up from Fleet Street, the most densely thronged highway in the metropolis. A single boy, Thomas Otley, was seized in Cheapside. The net quickly spread out. Children were picked up from St. Stephen's. Record of them is the name in the Bridwell charge book. One of the few of whom we will hear more was Elizabeth Abbott, the third child to be arrested. By February 1619, 140 children were in Bridewell, listed as held for Virginia. No doubt they were lined up and the most robust settled by an official from the company, perhaps Sir Thomas Smith himself. 75 boys and 23 girls were picked out. 3 ships took them, sailing from London sometime in the spring of 1690. Another is thought to have been the Jonathan. On arrival in the colony, the children were sold for tobacco, though they and other children shipped after them would ever after be known as the duty boy. 1 in 4 of that first confinement was a girl. Before another batch of children could go, there was a seismic shift that appeared to change everything. Sir Thomas Smith was forced out as treasurer of the Virginia Company and replaced by Edwin Sandys, who promised a new deal to everyone. It is hard to fathom the relationship between Sir Edward Sandys and Sir Thomas Smith. They ended up poisonous enemies, each working for the destruction of the other. Given their characters and utterly different points of view, it is understandable that they clashed. Yet before the crisis of 1619, they had worked together seemingly harmoniously for years. Sandy, the son of an Archbishop of York, had sprung to prominence at the beginning of James I's reign as a parliamentarian, and a brilliant one, and a foretaste of the bitter constitutional arguments that would eventually lead to civil war, vying right to rule. The monarch's right was solely through a contract with the people. Sir Edwin asserted, at James's ascension, Sandys had been in such royal favor that he was among the first of the new king's subjects to be given a knighthood. But his views quickly turned the monarch into his enemy, and he cemented himself into that position when he went on to organize the defeat in Parliament of James's pet project, the union of the 2 realms, England and Scotland. Sir Edwin was a populist who revealed in taking on the powerful. He followed up his besting of the king by attacking one of the most envied and disliked groups in the land, London's merchant fraternity. Sandys arranged for himself to be elected chairman of the House of Commons Committee on Monopolies and went to war against the powerful merchants. There were, he said, 5,000 to 6,000 people engaged in trade in England, but because of the monopolistic dealings of the governors of the capital trade of the realm is in the hands of 200 persons at most. He probably was not exaggerating. London's take in customs due in 1 year was 110 pounds. That was more than 6 times the total take of 17,000 pounds from the rest of the country. No merchant was wealthier or headed more monopolies than Sir Thomas. In 1809, Smith allowed Sandy, the merchant's enemy, into the inner councils of the Virginia Company to take a prominent role. The Virginia Company treasurer was also happy, it seems, to see the Puritan politician voted onto the governing councils of 2 other ventures, the Somers Islands and East India Company. Perhaps Sir Thomas was acting on the Lyndon Johnson principles of preferring your enemy inside the tent, pissing out, than outside the tent, pissing in. Whatever his reasoning, after 1615, Smith's health deteriorated, and Sandy filled in for him when he was too ill to attend to Virginia business. In 1616, Sandys was officially appointed as Smith's assistant. He handled the matters as the establishment of a second lottery and the negotiation with the Pilgrim fathers who wanted to settle in New England. In 1618, as the street children were being rounded up, Sandys began to move against Sir Thomas Smith. He emerged as leader of a group not only by other leading merchants on the Virginia Company's court of shareholders, but by the aristocratic investors who were known at the court party. Now, though, the leader of the court party, Robert Rich, Earl of Warwick, fell out with him. The crucial issue between them was piracy. Warwick was an enthusiastic gambler in privateering and was maneuvering to use Virginia as a base from which to attack the Spanish. In 1607, a new governor, Sam Argyle, was appointed. He was in league with Warwick and allowed privateers into the Chesapeake Company. Company chiefs in London were told that with Argyle's connivance, Warwick's ship, the Treasurer, manned with the ablest men in the colony, was set out on roving in the Spanish dominion. Complaints about Argyle mounted. Smith had instructed him to rule with a lighter hand, but London was deluged with complaints about his tyranny. On one occasion, he had sentenced a planter to death for attempting to free a group of time the governor was refusing to liberate. Smith ordered Argyle home. The recall of his protege and a row over another of his practical ventures prompted Warwick to split from Sir Thomas Smith. In 1619, he forged an alliance with Sir Edwin Sandys, and Smith was forced out. Smith attempted to save face by resigning before being pushed. He announced that the king had just appointed him commissioner for the Navy, and this would leave him no time for the Virginia Company. He died 6 years later. Sir Edwin Sandys' triumph enabled him to control the company and the colony for 4 monuments, years, and wins platted from historians. He was, says the Columbia Encyclopedia, responsible for many of the progressive features that characterized the last years of the company's control over Virginia. Prime among these was the introduction of a representative assembly, the House of Burgesses. This was the beginning of freedom, according to one modern historian. Freedom for some was not freedom for others. In November 1619, 3 months after the Burgesses held their first meeting, Sir Edwin took the first step to resume the shipment of street children. In November 1619, he informed the Lord Mayor of London that the first 100 had arrived safely, save such as died on the way, and the company wanted more. We pray, your lordship, in pursuance of your former so pious action, to renew your life favors and furnish us again with 100 more for the next spring. The Common Council of London, which Sandys expected to pay once again for these deportations, was a little more demanding this time. It required a written assurance that the apprenticeships were genuine and a commitment that eventually in adulthood the apprentices would be offered a plot of land each. Years later, some of those few apprentices who survived long enough to qualify for a plot found that the land apportioned to them was deep in Algonquin territory. Roundups of children resumed the following month. On Christmas Eve, 1619, 10 boys were brought into Bridgewell. 4 were delivered from the city and 25 from different parts of Middlesex. Others followed in dribs and drafts. Bridewell's records tell us little about each child beyond a name and the destination kept for Virginia. Ages are not given, but the odd common in the charge book, such as Willie Larrett, is a little boy who says his mother dwells in the country at Westminster, just that some were very young indeed. The arrests of the children previous year, there were no recorded protests, and the children appeared to have gone quiet. No doubt they assumed they would spend a few months in a Gridwell prison workshop and then be released. Not this time. The grapevine of the street knew what was afoot, and the children did not come meekly. In late January, constables brought in more than 50 boys, half of them in a single day. Serious disturbances broke out, leading to a revolt inside Gridwell. Then someone, perhaps a parent or a pamphleteer, raised the question, by what right it emerged that no law permitted children to be forcibly transported. The 100 girls and boys who had been shipped to Virginia the previous year had been sent illegally. Edwin Sandys was forced to admit that the city lacked the authority to deliver and the company to transport children against their will. It did not matter. The 100 who had gone were history. Sandys moved rapidly to ensure that there would be no legal doubts about the next 100. On 28 January 1620, he wrote to the King's Secretary of State, repeating the claim that children transportation was a great humanitarian exercise and asking for powers to deal with the hardcore of the worst children who were refusing to go. He described them as those of whom the city is especially desirous to be disburdened, and asserted that under severe masters in Virginia, they may be brought to good. 3 days later, the Privy Council replied. It paid obstinance to the humanitarian motives of the Common Council of London in redeeming so many poor souls from misery and ruin and putting them in a condition of use and service to the state in Virginia. Then, with venom, the King Harold might have approved it turned to the children. The Horizon required the city and the Virginia Company, or any of them, to deliver, receive, and transport into Virginia all and every the foresaid children as shall be most expedient, and if any of them shall be found obstinate to resist or otherwise to disobey such directions as shall be given in this behalf, we do likewise hereby authorize such as shall have the charge of this service to imprison, punish, and dispose any of those children upon any disorder by them or any of them committed, as cause shall require and so convenient. End quote. With this, children could now be transported without reference to their own or their parents' wishes. The second batch appeared to have departed on the duty in the spring of 1620. Simultaneously, the company was beginning to send so-called bridal boats packed with women. This was part of the strategy devised by Sir Edwin Sandys to encourage planters to stay and marry the colony, to publicize the coming of more marriageable maids, and also publicize the news that for the further encouragement of men to marry them, those who did would each be offered the chance to buy an apprentice. The maids were to be offered for 120 pounds of tobacco each. The children for 20 pounds. It would become such a profitable business that Sir Edwin would later sink 200 pounds of his own into a joint stock company concerned exclusively with marketing maids. 200 meters from Bridewell, up in St. Paul's Cathedral, the incoming dean could see nothing but good in these departures to the New World. The dean was John Donne, the poet. In a rousing sermon, he blessed the Virginia enterprise. Quote, "It shall sweep your streets and wash your doors from idle persons and the children of idle persons, and employ them. And truly, if the whole country were but such a Bridewell, to force idle persons to work already not only a spleen to drain the ill humors of the body, but a liver to breed good blood. Already the employment breeds mariners. Already the place gives essays, nay, freight of merchandisable commodities. Already it is a mark for the envy and for the ambition of our enemies. End quote. Few of those dispatched to Virginia lived long enough to reach adulthood. The muster records indicate that of the first 300 children shipped between 1619 and 1622, only 12 were still alive in 1624. Eventually, their bodies had not proved more adaptable to the London, has been largely forgotten. History would take a keen interest in the destiny of the group of men and women who arrived a few months after the first shipment of children in 1619. They arrived in a ship flying the orange, white, and blue colors of the Dutch Republic and were mentioned in a letter to Edwin Sandys from John Rolfe, the husband and now widower of the Native American princess Pocahontas, who had died during a visit to England. Rolfe wrote, quote, about the latter end of August, a Dutch man of war of the burden of 160 tons arrived at Point Comfort. The commander's name was Captain Jope. His pilot was the West Indies. His pilot for the West Indies, one Mr. Marmaduke, an Englishman. He brought not anything but 20 and odd Negroes, which the governor and Cape Merchant, Virginia Company trading agency, bought for victual, whereof he was in great need, and much would be written over the next 400 years about the significance of this episode, but precious little was known about the ship or her cargo until the late 1990s, when painstaking research through Spanish records revealed where the Africans came from and who it was that sold them. The Dutch man of war was in fact not Dutch but English. She was the White Lion, one of the deadly little vessels that Sir Francis Drake had employed against the Spanish Armada 30 years earlier. His commander, Captain Jope, was not Dutch, but John Caldwell Jupe, a wild Cornishman who had inherited the vessel from one of Drake's captains. Jupe was an ordained Calvinist minister turned privateer. As with many ardent English Protestants, he married fervent belief in Scripture with fervent insistence on despoliation of Spanish as God's holy word. He spent 10 years renovating the White Lion and then took her to the Caribbean to trade on the Spanish treasure fleet heading home from Hispaniola. Portugal was at the time under Spanish rule, and Jupe targeted Portuguese galleons as well as Spanish. The White Lion flew Dutch colors to avoid charges of piracy. That was possible because the Dutch, unlike the English, were still at war with Spain. The wrath of King James I would descend on any captain attacking the Spanish while under the cross of St. George. It is not known when John Jupe brought the White Lion to the Caribbean. However, sometime in the spring or summer of Danielle Alfred, skipper of the treasure, she was the privateer owned by the Earl of Warwick, whose piratical activities had so embarrassed the Virginia Company the previous year. Spanish records report that in mid-July, English corsairs waylaid and captured the Portuguese slaver Sarro Batista. She had below deck some 370 Angolans who had been taken prisoner during Portugal's bloody war of conquest in London. They were being shipped into slavery at Veracruz. The English corsairs were undoubtedly the treasurer and the White Lion. According to Spanish records, the two raiders made off with more than 200 Angolans. Alfred, whose ship was larger than Jupe's, evidently took aboard the bulk of them. Jupe's share seemed to have been 30 men and women. Both captains then set course for Virginia, which had been such a haven for privateers under the governorship of Sam Argyle. Jupe arrived first, 4 days ahead of the treasurer, and then bartered his human booty. When Alfred appeared, he was less successful. Something caused him to up anchor almost immediately and take off before he could sell any of his Africans. He took them instead to Bermuda, where he could be sure of finding them a home, on estates belonging to his employer, the Earl of Warwick, owner of the treasurer. On the slender basis of these few words from John Rolfe describing the bartering of the 20 and odd Negroes, history molded a story of a Dutch slave trader selling the first slaves to America. Look at the book, This is the Barter at Point Comfort, as the moment slavery began. In reality, the road to slavery was already been laid through indentured servitude, and John Jupe's Africans were merely joining it, for they too were treated as indentured servants. The action was a one-off. Although the Dutch and Portuguese were bringing out slaves in their thousands from Africa, for the moment there was no market for them in Virginia. 6 years later, in 1625, there were still only 25 Africans in the colony. Many decades later, there were still only a few hundred. That would change later in the century. But for the moment, the core of England remained the colony's main source of chattel labor. That concludes chapter 4. And it was quite interesting. If you noticed me pausing a few times, it was because I had to circle certain words that I wanted to look up, as well as certain references that were made that I wanted to also, certain references that I also wanted to talk about when we get into the discussion portion of this conversation. So with that, we're going to let's go into our chapter 5, and chapter 5 is entitled The Jagged Edge. All right. All right, the jagged edge. When they first set foot in America, convicts and slave children from England must have felt trepidation and even dread. Equally, hope and expectation must have pumped through the veins of those making the trip voluntarily and being called free willers. But would discover that they were no more free than the convicts or the street urchins, and were wide open to abuse. One of the better treated servants among them would find that the price of bringing his wife and children to join him in Virginia was an extra stretch of bondage, either for him or for his wife and his children. The term indenture derived from the Latin dentare, to cut with teeth. It was used in England from the Middle Ages to describe a contract duplicated on parchment and torn jaggedly in half. Indented contract retained one half as evidence of what had been agreed. Land sale documents were called indentures. So were marriage settlements. Labor contracts were not. Generally, they did not require indenturing. As a whole body of English law governed the master master-servant relationship. That that changed abruptly in 1618 when the Virginia Company introduced head rights and revolutionized the labor market. The head rights fee was essentially an invitation to those with money to stipulating it with poor. The brainchild of Sir Edwin Stanley, the head right was a grant of 50 acres for every new settler. This land went to whoever paid the settlers' passage. News of the scheme led to a frantic scramble among speculators and planters who were willing to become their servants and be shipped to labor for them in Virginia. Indentures were used to tie them to the deal, and supposedly to tie the planter or speculator to it as well. Invariably, it was a one-sided affair. Servants were asked to indent to work unwaged for enormous lengths of time, anything from 3 up to 11 years or more. In return, most were offered little more than their passage to Virginia and the promise of a new life when servitude ended. Sometimes a strip of land was promised, but few would ever own an inch of soil. Such terms were terrible, but in an England where enclosures had thrown so many off the land and where an agricultural depression had set in, there was plenty of takers. During the 5 years to 1624, when the Virginia Company was wound up, 4,500 settlers arrived, which was as many as had been shipped in throughout the previous 12 years. Between a third and a half known indentured servant was blacksmith Robert Copey from the village of Nibley in the Cotswolds. Nibley had already etched its mark on history 300 years before, when King Edward II was imprisoned in nearby Berkeley Castle and, according to legend, horribly murdered on the orders of his wife's lover. We only know about Robert Copey because his indentured document survived, the earliest still extant. The agreement was between Copey and a syndicate of local gentry who had just secured 8,000 acres in Virginia. They called this tract of American forest after their corner of the Cotswolds, the Berkeley 100. Copey indentured with them in the summer of 1619. In return for his passage to America plus food and shelter, he was to be bound to the syndicate as a servant for 3 years. When that time was served, he would be offered a tenancy on 30 acres of syndicate land. In the event something stopped Robert Copey going through with the indenture, in the event something stopped Robert Copey going through with the indenture, he stayed in England, either too wise or too worried to try the New World. However, another of the Copey clan, Robert, he was a skilled man, a carpenter and turner. And the evidence is that he had the same deal as Robert, plus the syndicate's agreement to pay his wife a few shillings while he was in America. That made it very generous compared to the deal other servants would get, but Thomas Copey would not live long enough to appreciate his relative good fortune. In September 1619, Copey embarked smaller ships on the Virginia run. She was chartered to take an advance party of 33 indentured servants plus 3 or 4 gentlemen to the Berkeley holdings in Virginia. Few of the servants were as multi-skilled as Thomas Copley, and their indentures reflected it, most being far more onerous than his. Some of his fellow servants had to agree to be indentured for 5 years. some for 7, some for 8 years, to pay for their passage. Some did not even have to rent on being free. All went well with them to begin with. The syndicate's advisors had wisely counseled against arriving in the heat of the Chesapeake summer, a most unfit season when passengers arrived very weak and sick, there to fall under the great heat of weather. As a consequence, considerable numbers died either at sea or soon after disembarkation before they could be seasoned to the summer temperature. The Margaret's departure in September was designed to avoid these problems and seemed to have succeeded. No lives appear to have been lost en route, nor were there any fatalities or attacks by the Algonquins as the party reached the Chesapeake and found their designated tract of forest. Today, the spot houses a national monument marked by a great Georgian mansion where America's 9th president, William Henry Harrison, was born. It was Dowling Chuck of Wilderness. The advance party arrived on 4 December and celebrated with a Thanksgiving service that they vowed to repeat each year. It was these Gloucester men on the banks of the James River, rather than the Pilgrim Fathers a year later in New England, who first established a Thanksgiving Day in America. The gentlemen of the syndicate certainly had reason to be thankful. Thanks to the head rights this man they brought on the Margaret entitled the syndicate partners to an extra 1,900 acres. Another 53 servants later recruited in the southwest of England would add a further 2,650 acres. On top of that, many more thousands of acres became due because of shares the syndicate brought in the Virginia Company. All told, the gentlemen from the Cotswolds more than doubled their American holdings in little more than a year. Other syndicates did the same, and rich individuals or groups shipped more than 100 servants each to Virginia and claimed their land reward. We don't know how the Berkeley Hundred indentured servants were treated after they were put to work. There is little more to go on than the records of mortality rates, which were dire across the colony. Of the 1,200 newcomers in 1619, more than 800 perished in the first year. Some were killed by Native Americans, some by disease, and some by infections caught in the jam-packed ship bringing them. And judging by what we know of life in the tobacco field, 300, the death rate seemed to have been lower than most. A list of settlers drawn up just 9 months after Kofi's party arrived records 4 settlers as slain, presumably by Native Americans, 1 gent killed by another gent, 1 drowning, and 9 unexplained deaths. Kofi survived those first months. He was made an assistant, an overseer, and was obviously a highly valued man, so much so that he felt able to press for his wife Joan and their children Elizabeth and Anthony to join them. The syndicate agreed for a price for the room his little family would take on the next voyage of the Margaret. Kofi would have to indenture for an undetermined number of extra years in servitude or indenture his incoming family into bondage. The leading light of the syndicate instructed such conditions are to be made such that the husband retribute to us a competent satisfaction in the augmentation of years of his, her and their sons and daughters' services. And a period during which it is common for poverty-stricken families to farm out their children rather than see them go hungry, the syndicate's terms might not have seemed as alien as they do today. At all events, an agreement of some kind was reached, and Thomas Copi's family of 3 sailed to join him in America in 1620. 18 months later, all but one of the Copy family were dead. The first laws governing the treatment of servants like Copy had been agreed 4 months before his arrival by a group of worthies gathered in the choir of Jamestown's little wooden church, created by the Virginia Company to give the colony a measure of self-government. One of their priorities was how to control the hundreds of Thomas Copley's arriving in the headrights rush and the tens of thousands of other servants who would follow. The church was the only structure in the colony large enough to accommodate all 22 burgesses. The institution was modeled on the English House of Commons. By guards in flowing red robes, the burgesses attempted the same solemn pomp as in Westminster. They had a speaker and sergeant-at-arms, and like the Commons, were dominated by landed interests. A new governor stood high on the agenda was the competitive scramble for the servants. Planters or their agents were stealing servants from under each other's noses even before they reached the colony. Back in England, servants who had just indentured for America were being enticed to break the contract and indenture for the colony on better terms with someone else. Other servants were being enticed to jump ship on arrival and indent with a new master, severely to punish the seducers and the seduced. But in the event, targeted the servants alone. They were to be made to serve the full term contracted with both masters, one after the other. Something of a precedent was thus established. Extra time in servitude for desertion. It would be used with growing ferocity in succeeding decades by Virginia and other colonies. Numbers of servants fled from their masters, and the authorities attempted to deter them. In the 1630s, fleeing servants would face 2 days extra service for every day away. In the 1640s, 5 days for every one away. And in the 1650s in Maryland, an extra 10 days for every one away. A servant on the run for several weeks could face years of extra bondage. Needless to say, anyone helping them was punished too. Meeting the burgesses underlined the master's absolute right over servants. They conferred on the master the right to use bodily punishment for not heeding the commands of the master. That would lead to a whipping post being installed in every locality. Masters would be given the option of bringing in servants to be punished there or administering the penalty themselves on their own plantation. The extra time precedent applied to disobedience, too. In addition to a whipping, resistance to a master or an overseer was also to be punished 2 years additional servitude. A taste of what servants might expect was given during the meeting when the burgesses formed themselves into a court and sentenced an errant servant. The servant had allegedly slandered his master and indulged in an open display of wantonness with a woman servant. The Burgess empowered the master to place his servant in the pillory for a period of to nail his ears to the post and to give him public whipping on each day included in his sentence. In later years, other, sometimes still harsher sentences, including the loss of an ear or both ears, would be handed out by the Burgess. Yet some of these were the same planters who had complained bitterly everyone was treated in the grim days of Sir Thomas Dale, calling it slavery. A first step in restricting servants' family rights was also taken at this inaugural meeting. It appears to have been prompted by the arrival of the first of the bridal boats, which were bringing marriageable maids to the colony as part of Sir Edwin Sandys's scheme to boost family life. Prospective husbands were expected to buy their brides, but Sandys was fearful that the hearts by handsome servants and orders went out from London to prevent that happening. Quote, "We would not have these maids married to servants," the Virginia Company instructed. The Burgess did their part by imposing a ban on any maid or woman servant in the colony marrying without both the consent of her parents or master, end quote. Later, they would bring in laws banning all servants, male and female, of whatever age, from marrying without the master's sanction. 2 years extra service on any woman servant falling pregnant, even if her master was the father. Rules controlling human behavior were to have the greatest impact on female servants. This was just the start. Over the next century and a half, a good deal of the time of Virginia's House of Burgesses and of the Assembly of neighboring colonies would be taken up with how to keep servants in check. In London, the Virginia Company remained preoccupied. 1919 did not deter the messianic Sir Edwin Sandys. When news came through that nearly 70% of those transported were dead, Sir Edwin and his servant John Frere said they were sorry to hear it and advised planters to pray harder. They then looked for other sources of labor. Sir Edwin set up a committee to comb the whole kingdom for youth of 15 years and over who were a burden on their local parishes. Parish was told that the company would take the youth to Virginia as apprentices for £5 per head. Meanwhile, the second and third batches of Cockney children were sent. Sandy's biographer made clear that he was generally too lofty to get into the grubby details of who was sent and how. His deputy, John Frere, dealt with such matters. Whichever of them was responsible, they were not too fussy in their selection. Convicts from London continued to be transported, while a number of girls picked up in London to be sent over as for apprentices appear to have been child prostitutes. One girl earmarked Bridwell Records as destined for Virginia is listed as a lewd vagrant, another as leading an incontinent life and being an old guest. Some of the maids dispatched on the bridal boats were probably prostitutes too. A note from a company official complained that a few of the women were out of Bridwell and of so bad choice as made the colony afraid to desire any others. What should have been more disturbing for Sir Edwin was a mounting tide of complaints from relatives of indentured, there was uproar over indentured abuses. A company report asserted divers, old planters, and others did allure and beguile divers, young persons, and others, ignorant and unskilled in such matters, to serve them upon intolerable and unchristian-like conditions. Another report lamented that the ungodly that have only respect for their own profits were enticing young people into finding themselves as servants for years to pay for their transport. Sir Edwin Sandys was as much to blame as anyone. It was on his instructions that those first shipments of women and children were marketed and sold at set prices. One can safely assume that transported convicts who were not put to work on company land were sold to planters as servants, probably for 7 years. In this hungry market, it inevitably followed that some of these hapless individuals would be resold soon emerge. According to Edmund S. Morgan, quote, men staked out claims to men, stole them, lured them, fought over them, and bid up their prices to 4, 5, or 6 times the initial cost, end quote. As Ted Mace puts it, Virginians were moving toward a system of labor that treated men as saints. Apart from anxious relatives and friends, few in England raised any objection to the traffic in colonies. An exception was that ardent recorder of English America's history, the one-time leading actor in it, Captain John Smith. He was appalled. In 1624, he wrote from London, quote, God forbid that masters there should not have the same privilege over their masters as here, but sell him or her for 40, 50, or 3 or 4 pounds to how they shall be maintained with apparel, meat, drink, and lodging is odious, end quote. Smith warned that such a trade in people was sufficient to bring a well-settled commonwealth to misery, much more Virginia. Smith was writing just as the Virginia Company was collapsing and about to be wound up. And that concludes, and it is 5 minutes before 9. So I'm going to end right there, and I'm ending at chapter 6. And chapter 6 is entitled, They Are Not Dogs. I think I read 2 chapters. I felt like I went really quick, but I read 2 chapters. Wow. I think I read 2 chapters. Yes, I did. Anyway, I'm gonna start taking callers to discuss what was read. If you have a question, a comment, or concern, please, I hope you were paying attention. I hope you jotted down a question, a remark, something, because I did. I attempted to, that was some of the pausing that I was doing because I saw certain things that I just wanted to circle, to go back to. But, I had previously highlighted something. So, please, I trust that this information is absolutely enlightening to you as well, and that you have been paying attention, you have been listening, and that you do have some questions. So press 1 on your cell phone down. And what we're going to do is we're going to unmute everyone, and we're going to have a group discussion. So first we're going to start off with Roz. Islam, are you there? Roz? Roz Mariah? Uh-oh. All right. I'm going to also unmute caller 916-201 and caller 760-693. And Roz, are you there? All right. 916-201 and 760-693. Are you there?
This time I'm here. It's the 760 number. And my question was to ask you, what is it that you are reading from?
Okay, I am reading from a book entitled White Cargo, The Forgotten History of Britain's White Slaves in America. We've been reading from this book, I believe, now for last Wednesday, I believe Roz read chapter 3. And then last month I read 2 chapters, and let's see, this is all on Wednesday. The first Wednesday and the fourth Wednesday, what we do is we read from what we decided to try reading from this book that chronicles the original slaves of America, and those slaves are modern Europeans. So, and this is a piece of history that has never been told. And so we're reading about it, and this our attention by Abdullah. And so, we've been reading it and been absolutely amazed with the information. So that's what we're reading from. Now, some people have been able to find this book on the internet as a PDF, and they have downloaded it, and I did as well. So I can affirm that. Yep, you can go, and also what you can do if you don't have it in hard copy, I'm going to upload it to the moorishnews.wordpress.com site, and you will see it under Wednesday syllabus, so that you can download it from there as well. Roz, are you there?
Right. We put the link in the description for the BTR description for the class.
I'm going to put the book to be downloaded in the syllabus on the moorishnews.wordpress.com website.
Okay. Because I know if whatever you put in the description for the class comes in the reminder email for each class.
All right.
Mm-hmm.
What reminder email? Because I don't send an email anymore. I used to send an email, but then Gmail decided that.
Whatever you put in the description for the class. I noticed that the MHHS just comes out, MHHS with no description. But if you put the description for the upcoming class, when you schedule it, BTR, once you schedule a class, BTR sends out a reminder for the class for anybody that's subscribed to the channel, to the station, to the Blog Talk Radio.
All right. Well, all right. But that's not going to have the attachment for the document. But that's good to know. I didn't know that. All righty. Roz Mariah, are you there? I know she's there, but who would like to begin this discussion of the 2 chapters that were read, because there was a lot of information that was provided. I already highlighted and there's parts that I'm really interested in, and I did my notations and everything. But I want to hear what other people thought. So who would like to begin? No one? Islam? All right, caller 916-201. Are you there? Islam? All right, caller 760-693. Are you there?
Yeah, I'm still here.
All right. Okay. So you're 760. So 916-201. Caller, you're not. Are you there? All right. All right. Well, that's fine. And okay, we got caller 623-907. Oh, Estelle. Are you there? All right, Assume. And I got caller 215-421. Are you there?
Islam. RVBey, Northwest of Maxim, near the Philadelphia territory. Oh man, where do I start as far as this? Because this has been very, very, very interesting, and just on chapter 4 and 5 has revealed so many things. First, just with the understanding that Europeans, or what a lot of Moorish call them, Slavics, or the original slaves, or whatever they want to break down.
Slavic slave is the English word for Slavic.
Okay. Oh, so that's the English terminology for. Okay, there we go. That ties that in, because it's very important for us to really understand just that concept alone of that. So it's pretty deep when we tap into the fact that of the Virginia Company, this Virginia corporation that was first off operating on the North Mexican on the North American continent, period. The fact that it was a corporation that was established that operating on our continent,
and it's still a corporation.
And it's still a corporation, absolutely. And to the fact that when they mention certain key words in these two chapters, such as colony and things like that, the first thing that comes to my mind when I hear the term or the word colony is, of course, the 13 colonies. And if we fast forward to certain things, we look at the fact that all of these so-called nation states or colonies, so to speak, it makes perfect sense when we sit back and analyze this whole thing of trafficking. And one of the things that we always embrace is the fact that how the so-called certificate or birth certificate is pretty much proof of human trafficking, and the so-called the term contract. Because when I seen in there, when you went over, I believe it's chapter 4, when it mentions something about the indentured service, pretty much consented to whatever contract, of course, to get here to see that it was totally different from what they thought it would be. But the fact that it's a contract, and when we fast forward into the modern times or these days of the whole concept of a birth certificate and everything that has to do with the birth certificate and that contract, and also at that time when they were marketing and trading and doing those things. So you may come across a lot of things in reference to what the birth certificate is. There's so many videos and so many websites that you really have to do some real studying to really embrace the whole concept of the birth certificate. But that during in the 1600s up into this present date, you can see how these things, it just pretty much is a duplication or just sort of an upgrade of what was going in, or a modernized thing compared to what was actually going on then. And when they started scooping the children off of the street, it reminded me of something that I currently came across with a program near the Philadelphia territory when I was doing some studying and some navigating, where they have programs of private investors in the California territory that's opening or trying to set up shop here near in the Philadelphia territory, with pretty much going into the cities and in the counties and grabbing families, specifically mother and children, because they really don't include the father in most cases. So they have certain programs of private investors, and through your reading, the private investor was Sir Edwin Sandy, I believe his name is Sir Edwin.
That's right.
Sir Edwin was was an investor as well. Said he was a major investor. So if we look at these present times, we see that from what I came across, that there are still private investors who are investing in families being put in project situations or still locked in to a certain corporation that we're dealing with, because times are changing. It's the age of information, so a lot of people are awakening or asking questions. So we have private investors still trying to duplicate that system of taking families, specifically the mothers and the children, and placing them into a project situation that a lot of us come from a project establishment, but they are trying to duplicate that in a way where it's acceptable to the so-called citizens or the people in that colony, or make them kind of feel like it's just like how they persuaded a lot of the indentured servants that if they go to the new world, if they go over to the new world of all the possibilities of things that could manifest for them. So it's the same thing that's just happening on the same soil. It's like it's almost like it's so identical of the system that was going on up until what's happening now. So when it mentioned the Native Americans, that little sentence that you brought out, where the natives, it was a little conflict between the natives and quite a few of the settlers were murdered or something like that. I'm gonna reread that part, but it's so evident that those two sentences, when they mentioned Native Americans, now we all know that Moors are native to the land. We are native to this land, to this continent. So even with the studies of the colony of Pennsylvania, where a lot of the tribes, when the settlers came onto this territory, it was much conflict going on between the natives and the European settlers. And of course there were wars and much killing from the natives doing pretty much fighting or kind of warring with that. So when they mentioned that part, that just automatically rung a bell in my mind that, of course, there were Moors here already during this whole establishment of the European coming to the New World, the so-called New World. So when all of the grants that were being given, all of these grants for the land, and I think it was a few areas in the region where it was like 1,900 were given for X amount of servants, and 22,900 acres granted to certain things. That instantly rung a bell when William Penn was granted the so-called Pennsylvania territory. So it's so identical of everything that we're reading now. It makes so much sense as to what's happening with us at this moment. And Islam. I'm sorry to be long-winded, but everything just like.
This is great. No, this is fantastic. I just want to interject right here because you mentioned the conflict between the Moors that they're calling Native Americans and the colonists. Now, if you were paying attention, one of the major reasons that there was a conflict is because, did you hear what they said? That when some of the indentured servants' time had been concluded, they would tell them, oh, well, your acre of land is over in what they call the Algonquin area. But they didn't have a charter for the Algonquin area. So it was their way, right? So they was telling her, oh, go over there, because we're done with you, so you might as well just be killed. So go on over there, and so the Moors is going to kill you as soon as you step foot on the land. And, that's what happened. Initially, that is what happened. And then, they themselves were steadily, creeping and increasing their usage territory. And that's why they had all of this fighting. But before you continue, Roz, are you there?
Yes, I am here and listening.
Oh,
yes,
there you are.
yes, it's
All right, so I was calling out to you, and I didn't know where you were. And then the line was so quiet, I was like, wait a minute, am I not being heard?
No, I had to step away for a minute, but I've been listening now. Yes, I was just muted to make sure that I could hear what was being said. Islam, who is it?
That was
that's RVBey.
I know that's a Sim. How you doing? I heard that. Huh?
Yeah. That's a Sim, and we have a Sim's nephew. I apologize. I didn't catch your appellation.
Qasim. Islam.
And then we have,
I sound familiar. I know that voice. How you doing, brother Qasim? Qasim and I,
well.
how y'all doing?
All is well.
Now, let me just make sure I was listening to him talk about, and what he's saying is this is so important, and really what's being said in the book is that all of those documents, those instruments they have, such as the birth certificate, etc., it absolutely has nothing to do with us and natural flesh and blood beings. That's all the stuff they created for them.
Absolutely.
Right. So, wow.
Well, in actuality, I believe that this reference here predates the birth certificate. But it's from this activity that the birth certificate eventually gets created, because the birth certificate is a catalog of property, and that's why you go to the registrar to get the birth certificate. And it used, like I said, it used to say, there used to be a shingle outside of their door, and it said registrar.
Right. So they were registering the property.
Yep.
Right. That's right.
Right.
But we see how they.
Go ahead.
Hello? We see how they was refining their activities as they continue. For instance, the House of Burgess, the body created by the Virginia Company to give the colonies a measure of some self-governing. Here we go. They just create these things. Then they start creating statutes and codes as they was going on, by the different behaviors of the people. They started creating these statutes and codes. Extra time in solitude for desertion. Extra time for picking somebody else's greens. Extra time for walking across the street. You know what I'm saying? How they just as they go. Extra time for running a red light and ain't no cars coming either way. They just create these here extra things and to keep you in certitude, knowing that they was wrong, but they just wanted to extend this so-called contract. So here we go, another what do we say? A Heresian contract, where you have a contract to come over and work for 7 years. Now they're going to attach all these other so-called things to them to extend the contract that you don't have nothing to do with, huh?
Hey, doesn't that sound like prison?
Yes. See, because I tell people, we didn't have none of these prisons and none of these things before this Albion came here on this land. We didn't have those things. We didn't deal with our people like that.
That's right.
And so they brought these people here, and they was rogue. These people was rogue.
Mm-hmm.
And so they had to try to keep them tame, keep them in line. You know, that was the importance of the blood oath. You know, look, either you're going to do this or this was going to happen. You know, so, you know, and then these dudes.
What would you say to people who might say, oh, well, that's the way that it is now. That's just the way that it is. What would you say to them? Because I know it's from a lack of them knowing the history and knowing, you know, law, which are connected together. So it's basically just from our lack of knowledge, period, that we have acquiesced and consented to these things without real consent. Because, like you said, they're adhesions.
Mm-hmm.
That's right. So you ask, what do I say to the people now?
Mm-hmm. That think that this stuff that we're talking in these statutes, well, that's the way it is now. That's not. I mean, I think we fell so far away from, you know, who we really are. You know, it doesn't really matter why anymore. But there's people who would say, well, that's the way it is now. Like they think this stuff they're doing, and we're showing where it comes from and how it does not apply to us. But people who don't know that, obviously they think, oh, well, that's the way it is now. That's the law. I mean, that's what they would say, right?
Oh, absolutely. And we find that that's the problem. Ignorance is a terrible thing. And I always tell people this here all the time. Ignorance is a terrible thing. And you know how I know? I was once ignorant to these things. And once you have light on these things and know that where they come from, who's who and who's not, then, you know, it's a different measure. It's a different measure to man or woman, you know, once you know. But I say to the people who don't know and say, oh, that's the way it is, the fact of the matter is, if they living out that life, that is the way that it is.
Right.
That is
That's
for them, but that's not the true reality of these things because it's proof right here, a written history. Matter of fact, I was as I was following, it was saying the biographers, they was writing the history as we go because the people were still alive and they was writing this history. They was carrying their biographers with them, writing down these things. And the biographer who was writing it down himself said, this shit is so cruel, I can't even write it all down.
Mm-hmm.
You know, this is what was going on. You know, and another point I want to make, because I'm big on this here, is that slave ship thing, and where they put this image in our minds that it was thousands of people packed on one ship, you know, in line. And you clearly see in the evidence that the demonstration that this writer is presenting that it was only so many people, only 100, 150 people on a ship. You know, maybe at the most 400 people on a ship, you know, at a time, and then most of them died. You know, and then the rough seas and stuff like that. So, and then they got all this history right here in documents. Produce all the documents of the cargoes of the slaves. Find the production of all the, you know, because all this is produced. They got the number of children that they brought over, the number, and they got it broken down to the boys and the girls, you know, systematically. This dude, he was systematic in what he was doing you know, to the point where he was catalyzing this here thing for future use. And we see how they refine their activities. And like we said, to the birth certificate, they refine these things, you know, as the things change. And they just, you know, from the Celtics in Scotland and how they took over and wiped out all the people and then brought their own people in and populated the towns or the different villages, how they came here to do this, repeat it, but they just was refining it and refining it. And that's how come, to Qasim's point, we have that birth certificate and these things now, because they streamline this here thing, you know. And now, and then it's even worse, because in the illusion of the mind of the people, they can't see it. They can't see it. They can't understand it, you know. So I'm big on that thing about the slavery thing, because what he said in 1925 in Jamestown, it only was 25 African slaves in the colony. Only 25.
That's right.
All those dudes, they was all white. They were all Abions in that colony. Oh man. So we really got to look into this thing and dissect this thing and read this thing, because this is a lot of history. I was like, there's some things here I said I ain't had no idea of, you know. Yeah. So, but when we look at things today, and now we have, this is a great demonstration, because it gives us something to prepare to compare to. See, a lot of the times people can't. It's two things people have a problem with. They have a problem with seeing things as they could be, or they have a problem with seeing things as they were, you know, in a sense. So to look back, to think that the colony was full of these slaves, and they were all so-called white, and they was children, and they didn't have no rights. They did what they pleased with them, you know. A lot of times they look at people and give them too much credit. For instance, I talk to some brothers, and we be talking about certain things, and they tell me, you know, to prove their point. They said, you know, we might be talking about a discussion about just about anything about, and they used the example. Well, I even the white man told me, as if them talking to the white man, and they give him too much credit for knowing something. You know, even the white man told me you got to do this here. I'm like, damn, you be giving him too much credit. You know, they just as dumb stupid. They didn't know how to read. They didn't know how to write. All those children and slaves that came over, they didn't know how to do none of that. Read, write. Only the nobles, and some of the nobles didn't know how to read. When you further investigate this thing, you know. So we just give too much credit to what we don't know, you know, to our ignorance and stuff like that. If you don't know, damn it, say you don't know. And study this stuff.
There it is. Say you don't know, and then get to stepping to know.
Get to stepping. You know,
All right, or get to studying, one of the two.
All right, before we continue, I just want to acknowledge we got quite a few people. Thank you so much. We got a nice little discussion group this week. We got caller 510334. You're unmuted. We got caller 9. Sister Carol.
It's long, family. It's long.
It's long.
But
we got
can I interject? Okay.
Yeah, just hold on a minute. I just want to let everyone know who's unmuted. Caller 210649. you're unmuted, and let's see, caller 760-693, you're still unmuted. Caller 916201, you're unmuted as well. Now, before we talk, if you're not, I'm not sure who might have background sound going on, but if you don't have nobody sitting next to you, then you're good. But if you got some background sound going on, can you just mute your phone so that we don't have interference? And Sister Carol, you're on.
Yes. Greetings. Oh, it's so good to be able to connect tonight. But I went into the archives and I caught up to tonight's class. So let me tell you how I seen, because what he spoke on a little bit about the 25 Africans, that's what really captured my attention when you read the part about only 25 being deposited there are Africans. I mean, because our people keep thinking that this 1492, we were brought over here on ships from then on. Here it is, the 1600s. And they're telling you, and then he's mentioning in the book only 25 Africans, which are Africans from our family across the water, was deposited here on our land. And I'm like, if they can only understand that concept and realize that, hey, everyone that was slaves then were modern Europeans. They were not us. We were free and had our own government and establishment and doing what we wanted to do on our land. And then it goes to show you where we would start when they would start to enslave us later on, centuries later, like 17, 1800s. But 15, 16, 1400s, we weren't enslaved. So that's what I got out of this chapter mainly. They were still enslaving the modern Europeans, bringing them here to our land. And I said, gee, hopefully people can see that and realize that we weren't enslaved. Our ancestors weren't enslaved as long as they say was teaching us in these so-called schools. So that was very interesting.
Yes.
And not only that interesting, that's important for us to understand that. Very important. Islam.
Yes, it is. Somebody else was going to say something?
Yes, I was going to say, matter of fact, when they told the other shipholder that it did have some other Africans, he had to instead go to Bermuda.
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
Yep.
You know, he couldn't even set foot on this land with them.
That's right.
So, you know.
Come on, family, join in the I want to bring out the definition of indentured on page 89. The term indenture derives from the Latin indentere, to cut with teeth. Now, to me, then it says it was used in England from the Middle Ages to describe a contract duplicated on parchment and torn jaggedly in half, indented. And I'm like, okay, I don't get that from the original Latin word. You know, how do you get torn with teeth or cut with teeth to mean a document that's torn? That's how they're using it. And then
maybe
it says,
they use the teeth to cut it.
Right. Well, I don't know, maybe. But then they say each party to the contract retains one half as evidence of what has been agreed. So to me, that sounds like they wrote the contract on two sides of paper. Because, you know, back in those days, they didn't write portrait-wise. They wrote landscape. So to me, what that means is they wrote the contract out on both ends of the paper and they tore it in half. So you got a copy of the terms and conditions, and the other person got a copy of the terms and conditions. But that really wasn't a contract because
they didn't have copy machines.
Well, yeah. Absolutely.
Paper, yeah.
There was no staple.
Yeah.
No staples. But here now, what was interesting is that, there's just a lot of things interesting because they were literally, because this is modern Europeans they're talking about. These are not Moorish nobles who's doing this stuff. All right? These are modern Europeans. And it's like their position is, look, I will enslave my own broke people to achieve a better life than join them in a miserable life. That's what this is saying. And then, did you hear how they made their own House of Virgins? And they duplicated it off of the House of Commons over in Great Britain, which is English infiltration. Now, if you follow along with our Tuesday class, when we researched borough, all right, the definition of borough is it's a corporation and it is owned by a family Burgess. Burgess is a title of nobility over in Great Britain. So now modern Europeans would never be a Burgess. But as they told you in this reading, they made of themselves a House of Burgess, and they took on, they said in this reading, the airs and the attitude of the nobles of Great Britain, but they are not the nobles of Great Britain. And these are the people who will eventually, because see, you have to understand that they're running somebody else's company. These are not their companies. But what will eventually happen in the Civil War is that our people help them take control of those companies that they were running for quite some time, but not all of them. The ones that signed on to be protected under the Union, their title was changed from company, and they had a succession of changes, but it was changed from company to eventually today be referred to as a state. A state. All right? Now, state is supposed to only consist of people who agree to be members, not forced members, which is what this history is all about, hence the American Constitution, where everything is based on free will, and it is supposed to be at the will of the people. But the majority of the people, they have given up their rights because they don't know them, and so if you don't know them, you can't speak on them. Right?
That's right.
Absolutely.
So this is really amazing. This historical reference, and what's really I was going to say what's really amazing is it's not taught in these institutions they call school, but you know why now as we continue this reading, because the people who are running those institutions are the lineal descendants of these slaves. So they're going to tell you that's true.
Yeah.
Right?
And Islam is a deep thing. Islam, can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes.
Islam is also deep when you analyze the whole concept of the contract as well, because we all know that what makes a contract.
Mm-hmm.
What makes a contract?
You have to have substance. You have to have two
agreement.
People in agreement.
Term.
Right.
Yeah.
Mutual consideration and equal exchange on both sides.
Right.
And
right. So So the point of that is if you look at it now, where when most people go in to sign that so-called contract for the driver's license in order to navigate on their own on the land, it's pretty deep how these people, they so-called split that contract in half, and they gave them their copy and they had their part, as if it was some type of passageway or a certificate to the new world. And it's almost like that's the same thing that goes on now, where unknowingly people consent to the contract from the driver's license agency or corporation in order to have a driver's license, which they don't own, and it has an expiration date which they always have to renew. And once it expires, then it's non-existent. It's like it never existed. So you have to keep on. It's like you continuously in order to have that privilege, you just paying back and forth once that term is done. So when we look at the whole concept of a contract, the so-called contract that they had, is just so identical to the whole breakdown of this so-called driver's license and all of the things that's
contract.
You know what I mean? So all of it.
Contract. Only one party in the contract knows the full terms of the contract.
Right.
And that's not on in the contract. We don't even know that it is a contract. Most of us.
Well, it's really not. It's really not a contract because the basic, not all, just the basic elements of a contract is missing. That's why.
That's right.
But as you said, it is an indentured document. Now, but see, now when you look at this whole indentured servant thing, that is slavery. And according to the Constitution, slavery was abolished. Now, I was doing some studying, and one of the arguments of the what is it? One of those one of the arguments I want to see I want to say it was emancipation. I could be wrong, but it said that the state they cannot have slavery, but territory can. And I didn't understand that for a long time until I was having a conversation, and as I was speaking, it just came right out my mouth as if it had been in my cranium all along. And I realized what they were talking about. Because, see, there were many corporations, companies / corporations that were established. We know New York State as a company. We know the Virginia company. We know the Maryland company. We know the Pennsylvania company. We know the Philadelphia company. We know the New York City company. All right? Now, when you look at, for example, Maryland and Baltimore, these are, of the two, only Maryland signed on to the provisions of the Constitution. Baltimore did not. So, but both of them have a sales territory. So Maryland said, we're going to adhere to the provisions of the Constitution, but Baltimore did not. So Baltimore is considered a territory. Because they didn't sign on to the provisions of the Constitution, the presumption in terms of the European slavery is that they can have slaves. Now, what they had was slave workers. Now, today, we have labor laws, slave workers. It still exists, especially in New York. But, it's like, once again, it exists only because people who are forced to slave work, they don't know the law. They many times they don't speak the common language, which is English, but this is Morocco, so it's supposed to be Latin. But they don't speak the common language of everybody, and they don't know how to write and they're nice, and so if they don't know how to speak and write, then chances are they don't know how to read either. So unless somebody verbally catches them up with law, they're going to be at the mercy of any crook or criminal, much like the majority of the people are on planet Earth today. You know, especially on this North American continent.
Before I possibly lose the call. This starts around 7 o'clock on Wednesday night?
Sorry?
7:30.
7:30. Okay, and it goes into overtime about 9:30?
9:30, yeah. Well, 9:30 is when the lines go down. So if you don't get in before 9:30, you won't be able to get in after 9:30. So only the people who are on the call now will be able to continue this discussion, and it is recorded and it is archived.
Okay.
And this is usually, we see on the 1st and the 4th, and if there's a 5th Wednesday, we have this, we just started doing this reading of this book. If we, as the 2nd and the 3rd Wednesday, we're live at the National Theater doing a class, so you can listen in, but you won't be able to participate like you are today.
Okay.
All right.
Islam, I wanted to say another thing. Look how they introduced these other things like the syndicates. Other syndicates did the same, and rich individuals followed. So when we look up syndicate in Black Law Dictionary on page 4th edition on page 1620, and you look up syndicate, a university committee, a combination of persons or firms united for the purpose of enterprises too large for individuals to undertake, or a group of financiers who buy up shares of a company in order to sell them at a profit by creating a sanctity, a security. Okay. Now, in the small print, an association of individuals formed for the purpose of conducting and carrying out some particular business transaction. Originally, that's right. Originally of a financial character, in which the members are mutually interested. Exactly, a corporation.
Yeah.
But how they just use these other words, how all these syndicates, and you always hear the word, the mob, the syndicate, and stuff when they use that word syndicate.
Yeah.
Or the media syndicate, when these conglomerates get together and they buy up things, and they started seeing that these people was being so profitable that people was getting together in London, making their money and buying up shares. And remember this too, for all the people that don't understand, that all through this here he used the word America, buying shares in American holdings, going to America, not to the United States. So this America was here before this United States and before this United States of America. Get that thing straight in your head, you know.
Yeah, tell it. We said that when we went to Ellis Island, we read that first thing. It said, and then it became, or they became calling it the United States, or this is when the United States was formed. Talking about the American land that they already came to, finding people here with over 200 cultures. So you're right. That's a very important point you're making there, FM. Very important.
Yes, so reading.
And so would you say that if we would go back to right words and a correct jurisdiction, then we would find that, you know, and support that we're just not members/citizens of these corporations or of any of the plantations, the colonies, the Union States. Now, we're just not. That's not who we are in terms of being the Aboriginal, Indigenous, and Torres people. We're not that. So we have to be ourselves.
Be ourselves. And think about this here, which me and my nephew, sons, and nieces, we all had, and my wife, we had a conversation that when we create in our documents, for instance, our proclamations, declarations, our birth records, any of the documents that we create, holding allegiance to the Moorish nation. If you understand what happened here, then you will understand where I'm coming from as far as rebuilding. Not building no new nation and all that, as far as rebuilding the nation. We're talking about 100 years from now when these documents become part of your family heirloom. These become part of your estate. These documents is what your great-grandchildren is going to look at 100 years from now, 50 years from now. Yep. They're going to look not at no birth certificate at a state issued or somebody issued. They're going to look at birth records that you created, you had sealed with the consciousness of your allegiance to the Moorish nation. So when you see now people say, well, I don't know where to find that at in the history books enough because how they covered these things up. But now we have an opportunity at this stage in our development, in this cycle in time, as we create these documents to be kept within the families, all right, so that when your children see a birth record that you have 50 years from now, and they read it and they'll see the mother's bloodline in there, and they'll see the appellations in there and these titles in there where we talking about we can't find these things now. We are creating our own reality because that's exactly what they did. They came here to do business, and in doing such, they created their own documents. They started their codes and restricted things. And remember, these was things they did to their own people now.
That's right.
And they did for their own people. So we have to take that in concept as we build in today what's going on, what went on and what's going on as we rebuild.
You're talking family. You're right. You're talking family. And, too many of us, they haven't grasped that yet, I guess.
That's right.
Many people are out for what they can get themselves, so they're not thinking about what you're talking about in posterity. They're not thinking about posterity, and they're saying, oh well, forget it, because they don't have the knowledge. Many are acquiescing into wanting to be a party of and a party to the commercial game, which is what they came here for to do. That's their stuff. That's not yours.
That's right.
Right.
That's exactly right. So our stuff is all a lowdown.
A lodio. That's right, bro.
That's right.
Aboriginal, indigenous.
And that's what we passing on to our prodigy. So keep that in mind. And the sellouts is going to be on the wrong side of history. So, yeah.
Good point right there. Keep that in mind also.
Yeah, because when we read these things, the things that's happening now, and Cujo made a good point on the show Tuesday when, and I'm going to bring it back to what we see here. When we're talking about Illinois, for instance, if you take documents and say you was born in Illinois and this and that, and now 50 years from now, your children read it and it ain't no more. They look on a map and it ain't no more Illinois because they talking about dissolving the state and other states taking up that on paper, and it's no longer there. And your children start reading some documents 50 years from now, they won't be like, well, where is that?
Like
right,
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 we do
documents
now.
that said
Like right now.
Like we do right now.
Exactly. That's the point.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Right,
Instead of having on those documents Madrid El Aqsa, and then you might put in parentheses America or something, because if the whole American continent go underwater, then okay, you're not here anymore. But that's going to be here.
Exactly. Good point.
Yeah, so and I spent some time down, and I was in the military, and I was in the Navy, and I was stationed in Norfolk, Virginia. And this was years ago. And now that I'm reading this here, I see Portsmouth, I see Southampton Roads, I see Hampton Roads, I even see the name Norfolk. And this was the names of all these generals and stuff that came over here and start naming themselves a part of the landscape. You know, and it was one of those things that just raised the eyebrow as I was reading, and I was saying, I seen all those names when I was traveling the land back and forth from down in the Virginia territory up north. I would and traveling around that territory, I would see all those names that we seeing here, where they named the roads and they mapped that area and gave them all those names. You know, that was interesting to me how they just came and did it. And like at the point, I was ignorant to that fact until I'm reading this here. That's why I said this here brought a lot of insight for me. That whole Virginia area.
Right.
Yeah, how it was developed and everything. So, yeah, Islam.
It's very deep when you think about it all. It's very deep. It's like you don't even, you know, it actually creates a huge purge. You know, because all these years we thought that this information that we were given was correct. Now we're seeing that not only is this information not correct, it's not accurate. It's a lie.
That's right. Call it what it is. It's a lie. Period.
It's a lie.
It's a damn lie. Growing up as I was a kid, I thought the Indians was only in the West hunting buffalo, and that was it. You know, and now you see this here where we were native to the land, and we was all through this land. I mean, just all through this land. Yo, it was just a lie. It was just a lie. Islam.
My personal experience. You know what? Anna Eden, Roz, and Seem, it's so good to hear your voice. My thing is that I'm 63. Just had my 63 solar return. And I always felt, I mean, obviously they always told you we came from Africa and they brought us, but I never felt the connection across the water, even though I didn't have as much information as, we should have gotten. Definitely goodness knows what I know now. But I felt more connected to what they call the Indians than I did anything else growing up. That's what I even used to dream about it, even see myself dressed up in their costumes and what have you, you know. And so I always felt connected to this land. I did, but I knew I wasn't. Right. I knew I wasn't colored. I knew I wasn't Negro, but I was. I didn't say I was an Indian, but I always felt more connected to that culture. Because even in my home, I have a lot of Indian arts and, and collectibles and what have you. And and African, but mainly. And I'm like, I know what I was feeling, and it was just so good to know, even at this stage in life, that finally these truths are being revealed, and I know who I am, and nothing could deter me. Just could deter me from moving forward and just, learning as much as I can and leaving all this information for my grandchildren and passing it on to any and everyone across my path, but mainly for me. Mainly for me, right. and I thank you all for this, and I tell you, like I say, it's about time. Yes. Islam.
Yes. I was talking to a brother here. He told me, when I got this information, I felt like I hit the jackpot. So when he was spreading it to other people, he was saying, listen, if they get it or not, it's not that he don't care, but he know he hit the jackpot.
Right.
So I was like, yes, thanks for that, Sister Karen.
You're welcome.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah. Well, it is far, everyone.
I'm fine when you're having fun. It flies when you're having fun, right?
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah. So it is 10 o'clock, and what we're going to do is that's going to conclude this broadcast. So next Wednesday, we will not read the next installation. Next Wednesday, we will be at the National Theater, or rather, I will be at the National Theater because I believe Roz will be traveling. Can somebody mute their phone?
Yeah, somebody has some background.
Yeah.
Okay, it's gone.
All right. Great. Wonderful. I don't know who that was. All right. So next Wednesday, I will be doing the class at the National Theater, and I still got that background going on. It's dropped off. All right. So I will be at the National Theater. There will be a class there. So make sure and join us to next Wednesday at the theater for a live class. And let's see, that's the second Wednesday. And then the third Wednesday, the following Wednesday, Abdullah will be there for the class. And then the fourth Wednesday, we will be back to do another reading from this book, White Cargo. I did put the PDF of it up on the moorishnews.wordpress.com page, and it's at the bottom of the syllabus underneath the picture of the book. So you can go and grab the PDF of the book. There are pictures in the center of the book that I am planning to photocopy, and I will update those also at a later date, and maybe I'll be able to do that by when we do our next reading, which will be the fourth Wednesday of this month. You'll be able to get those center photos, and you can review them. So that'll be available in the future. I want to say thank you to all of our participants in this discussion. Thank you so much. I so appreciate it, and I so love when we can get together and talk about a topic, build, share information, and just,
wake up to this new information, because it helps us to connect dots. And that's a great thing when our knowledge base increases and literally much of what we were told ends up in the trash as just that, trash, because of the new trackable and traceable and verifiable information. So that's a wonderful thing. I want to say thank you again to our listeners, and we shall see you on Tuesday for another edition of Principles of Nationality in Action, and then Wednesday you can either join us at the National Theater for a live class, or you can listen in. So with that, that concludes this broadcast, and thank you all very, very much.
Islam, peace and love.
Wake up, everybody, no more sleeping in bed. No more backward thinking, time